Okay, so this is where we last left off our level build. Sort of halfway through room 3. This is sort of the halfway point because we have 5 rooms total, so we have 2.5 rooms completed. So let's try to finish out our first pass here. Now, I was testing this a little bit, and although we can run on these platforms, it's a little strange to be so close to the wall for this section here. And when I'm thinking about the size of the blocks that are going to fall for this section of the level, because remember, this sort of stretch of catwalk has our falling blocks on it, I don't think there's actually enough space for the size of the block that I want. So I'm gonna select all these narrow pieces here, and I'm just gonna move them out away from the wall by 1 meter. So when we play test now by right clicking and pressing play from here to skip the first 2 rooms, so now when we run across, we're a little bit we're not gonna be so close to the wall, which felt a little strange to do. And also, I just know approximately the size of the block that I want to be falling, and it's going to be able to actually clear this wall on this side here now. And the other important thing to be testing is to make sure that we can actually fall down here. So if our player character did not fit in this gap, there's really no reason for it to be there other than for aesthetic purposes. So we can fall through this, so it is still a hazard. Now, obviously, when we fall in our game right now, through the floor here, we're just falling forever, which we don't actually want to do. I think eventually the game you will hit a distance that is so far from your world that eventually it will stop it. But you just fall forever. So I'm just pressed escape to get out of here. And now I'm way down here below my level. So to quickly get back up to this, I can select any of these mesh pieces I have placed. It does not matter which one. And press F on my keyboard to frame that piece. So it'll zoom the camera back up here. So if you ever fall down or end up way far away from your actual level, that's a quick way to get back to it. Again, that's just pressing F on the keyboard with any of these pieces selected. So let's continue. It looks like our 1x4 floors are not in our level, and that is because we dragged them, I think, out from the content browser here. So let's just make sure we place those back in our room 3. And one more time, I'm gonna test here. So I have moved these out by 1 meter. For this section of the catwalk here, I may move them out as well. However, what I had sort of envisioned for the fire hazards right here is to have them sort of shoot sideways out of the wall. So I do want the player to be close to the wall for this one. This sort of depends on how far you want those fire hazards to extend, how far you want their area to extend. So if you want to shift this over by 1 meter as well, you could certainly do that. You just may have to make your fire traps or whatever traps you place here extend a little bit farther out so it covers this region. So that's just something to keep in mind. But let's continue and finish up this room. So we, just like in room 2, we need to extend these walls down a bit. So I'm just going to select this one. I'm going to press Alt and drag it down. Oops. Oh, this is something that happens as well. If you are trying to duplicate and you're holding Alt and you accidentally click not on these gizmos, you'll get a strange sort of camera rotation. So that's why that happens. It just means that you didn't click precisely on here, but should be no problem. If your camera gets way out of whack, again, just use the F key to frame back into your selection. We're getting a little Z fighting right here as well. because this catwalk is intersecting with this piece here. So again, it does depend on what your final art assets are going to exactly look like, whether or not this is going to be an issue. But I'm just going to drop these down and in by 10. And again, it does sort of screw up this alignment here, but there are ways to hide things like this, which we'll talk about when we come into our second pass for our prototyping. So just upping my grid size again to return to my 100 increment grid, and hitting the down bracket, or the open bracket, I should say, key to drop it back down. Drop it down by 1 or 10 and in by 10. And in reality, it is likely, especially if you're working on like a team with a professional artist, that these floor pieces won't have thickness to them. They will just be the top planes. Again, it depends on your level design and stuff, but it's very likely that in the final piece that this side of the floor won't exist. So if that is the case, you definitely want to place them accordingly. So if you had this sort of top narrow section was not a filled in face and this side section wasn't, you would actually not be getting this conflict at all, and they would just line up perfectly. But I find it sort of distracting for my eye, and I'm just going to drop it down for now. I'm just coming underneath so I can see what I'm doing. Make sure that these are lined up. Go back down to 10, over 1, down 1, back up to 100, and snap it over. Okay. So that looks pretty good. If you want to fill this side and the other side with walls, you're certainly welcome to do that. I think I'm going to leave it and have some sort of support pillar instead, because it was sort of strange. I tested it out with the walls, and having just this little narrow gap with solid walls felt a little strange, and it was also hard to get in there and line things up and see what I was doing. So I'm going to leave this for the time being, and I'm just going to move straight on to the ceiling for this room. So before we even do that, let's come in here, create a subfolder for ceiling 3. Let's move this piece over. And let's drop it into ceiling 3. And it is really just the same process all the way through until we have our complete level built out. Looks like we're off by 10 centimeters again. That can happen. It looks like it's because these should be shifted over by 10 and this whole wall. So if you find that you need to be shifting whole walls or hiding whole walls, like sections like this, you can just do the same thing we're doing with the ceilings. Just create a folder for, like wall room 3 wall south, or however you want to call it. You would just do it the same way we have been with the ceilings. Okay. I've also chosen to keep all my rooms squared off because it makes it easier to build with our grid system. Now, it's not necessarily aesthetically the best level design to have square rooms such as this, because it's quite boring to look at, frankly. And there are lots of different ways you can vary up your rooms to make them a little bit more dynamic and interesting. However, for the purposes of this course, since this is not about creating like a super polished game, this is about teaching you the basics, more or less. I'm not too worried about like this being the best level ever created from a design standpoint. But we will go through a second pass and you know, make it a little bit more visually interesting. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so that is pretty good for room 3. I've just thrown in some work lights. Again, not our final lighting setup. So if we play from here, you can see, well, the player will run into this room and be like, okay, this is too big to jump. Clearly, I need to do something else. They'll see the catwalk. They'll run across it, and we will be coming back around and putting in our traps across these catwalks. Okay, so that's pretty good for a first pass on room 3. Let's move on to room 4. Let's consult our plan here. So we come down by 1 unit. Again, all these hallways are just like one square block on this grid, just for the sake of simplicity. So we're going to come down 1 unit, and then it's going to extend 1, 2, 3 down. So let's duplicate this piece out. Let's open up our outliner, collapse these so we can see what we're doing. Oh, let's move our point lights that we just added into room 3. We will create an, oops, how about that? Accidentally opened the world settings tab. That's all that does, is opens a new tab, but you can exit out if you do that. So I'm gonna select this, come to the outliner, create our folder, room 4. And because we know we're gonna need it, let's just do ceiling 4. All right, let's move this floor piece that we selected into room 4. Okay, so just a reminder, it's 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3. And then it looks like it comes out 2 until we reach the pit. So it's 2 wide right here. There we go. Oh, actually, we did not. I'm gonna Control Z to undo this. I did not realize we did not make our little hallway here. So let's make that first. So this piece, because of the way that I have chosen, this piece should actually be part of room 3, not room 4, because of the way I have chosen to organize these transitional spaces. And again, that's just something I decided would be a good way, and there's no particular reason why this hallway should belong to room 3 and not room 4. I just made an executive decision, and it needed to go somewhere. Here off by 10 again on this side. So it looks like this entire ceiling is off by 10 centimeters in this direction, which you can see because the grid is not lined up. So it would be sort of a pain to go in and select these all by hand, but luckily we have these all in our room 3. So all I can do is just select everything in the ceiling category here. I can deselect this one because I already moved it and just pop that over by 10. So super quick, and another good argument for staying organized with folders in your outliner. Okay. Let me just make sure everything's in its proper place. Yeah, looks like we have nothing in room 4, which we should not at this point. Okay. So yes, now we have our little hallway. Now we can move on to room 4, which again, so from here, we're going to go 1, 2, 3 down. Two, 3, and we're going to go 2 across until we reach this pit. So it's already 1. Let's go 2. All right, let's select all of these and move them to room 4. Hide that and continue with the walls. Two, 3. Okay, so now we have the first part of room 4 and the start of the pit. So let's look at this. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 units wide on this pit. But we know that the walls have to extend at least that far as well. So the way I'm going to measure this is just by extending this wall out by 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now when I duplicate this piece out, I know it'll go right there. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so the 5th one should be where the floor is. Okay. And we can just extend this down 3, 2, 3. And we're gonna do the same thing with this wall. I'm gonna select 2 at a time to make this go a little bit faster. 2 and 1. And then we know that the pit needs edges for the walls. So let's go 1. And fix this. If you're wondering why this keeps happening, why like I'm consistently off by 10 sometimes, it has to do with where the pivot is on my wall pieces. So because the pivot is on one edge, like it's not in the center of this edge here, because I wanted this, like each edge to be flush with the grid. So sometimes when I rotate it, I should be rotating it like 180 degrees all the way around, and I'm not doing that in a lot of areas. So that's why sometimes I'm off by 10 and have to go back and readjust it, if you were wondering. Press F there to get my screen back. Okay, that's a good start to this pit. So before I complete this room out, I need to test the width of this pit. Now, obviously, we weren't meant to jump over this pit in one go. It's far too large. So we need to create some of these little platforms here. In order to test it, we need to create a new piece. So I'm going to do this the same way I have been doing. You certainly could just add a new block and scale it, but I'm just going to use these floor pieces as a starting off point because they're already at the height that I want them to be. So same way we created the floor and the catwalk, we are going to go into our modeling mode here. I'm going to duplicate this out. And now what I want to do is scale it down a bit. So I'm going to keep snapping on because I want to keep these fairly regular too. Let's start with like a, I think 3 by 3 looks pretty good. So when thinking about these platforms, I did not really draw them to scale in this map, which probably I should have done, but sometimes we just work with the resources that we have. You know, maybe you didn't draw your own level map, so it is okay. What I'm trying to say is that it's okay to deviate from this map if when you get in and test it, the actual play requires you to. So if I were to make these to scale on the map, these would be like 1 by 1, right? That's about what they look like. It'd be like a 1 square meter platform. And now when we try to play test this, imagine playing a platformer and like trying to hit that and jump on it would be almost impossible. So I am going to deviate from this, and you can and should probably deviate from this unless you are an amazing top-down map maker. Not everything, you know, unless you're very experienced in level design, not everything you draw out is going to function correctly as you have drawn it out when you put it into 3D. And if you were that good at making your level maps and things to scale, well, you probably wouldn't need to take this course. So let's extend this out. And I think 3 by 3 is going to be pretty good, but let's test this out. So this feels much more reasonable to try to ask a player to run and jump onto it. So let's keep these 3 by 3. But because these are larger, that means that we're not going to have this many in our actual level. Like we can't fit 5 here. Well, we could fit 5 here, but they would be so close together, it would hardly even look like a challenge to jump on them. So let's go down to 3 and let's play test this and see how this feels. So that first one feels a little bit close. It feels like I could easily jump over it if I weren't careful. That one's okay. So it depends on, again, your level design. If you don't particularly care which way a player paths through this, and these are close enough together that you could jump from this one to this one. If you don't care, if you know, that's fine if you don't mind your player going through it. If you wanted your player to use everything, you would want to make sure that these are far enough apart that we cannot jump directly from this one to this one, and that we have to leapfrog over to this one first. Now, it does look like we can do it, although I do feel this one is a little bit close to this edge here. And we would easily jump straight over it. So let's right click and play from here. I've moved that out just by 1 meter. That feels better. That feels good. That feels good. And then obviously this is fine. Oh, this floor is going to extend, so we're not too worried about the distance from here to here, or at least I'm not. And then one last thing I want to test. If I can jump. So I can jump from this. So I don't think I want my player to be able to just do this in 2 hops. I think I do want to make them use this 3rd platform here. Now, I mean, there's lots of different ways you could design something of this nature. Again, you could have it so that these 2 are reachable with 1 jump, and maybe have like a pickup item, or, you know, a collectible over here, a treasure chest, something of that nature that would make a player want to deviate off the quickest path. But I think for the purposes of this, all I'm gonna do, I'm gonna select this entire section. I'm just gonna extend this pit by 4 meters. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just so I have a little bit more space. It adds a little bit more challenge. Again, we're not trying to make this really punishing or anything. This is our tutorial level, but I'm just gonna, just so I can space these out a little bit more. Oops. I think something maybe like that. So we are 3 meters right here from the edge. We are 4 meters from the edge here. So let's even this out and let's extend this space. So when I play from here, I feel like the optimal jump distance would probably place these things about 4 to 5 meters apart, but it's really up to you and how you want your game to play out and feel. You just need to make sure that it's possible for your player to do the things that you're asking them to do, and you also want to make sure it's not really so challenging that they give up on it, even if it is technically possible. You know, if you're clearing these things by like a fraction of a centimeter, that's probably just not enough clearance. Like you know, even if you can do it after testing it a bunch, you know, that's kind of the downside to playtesting your own games, is that you get so good at them because you have to do it so much that you sort of lose perspective for what is a reasonable difficulty level. Okay, so we have our platforms out here, but actually they're still referencing this floor 4 meters. So we need to do something about that. Before I do that, I'm gonna extend these down, actually. I want these to look like they're coming out of the floor, not floating up from it. So I'm going to extend these to a height of, I should probably do 4 meters because that is the height of everything else in our level, and it's just going to keep things consistent. So I'm just using the lines on this actual material to get a height of 1, 2, 3, 4 meters. Again, this is why this grid material is so useful. So I have a height of 4 meters here. So it's 3 by 3 by 4. That's going to be our jumping platform. So same thing, we need to create a new reference for it here. Coming into the modeling mode, we're coming into mesh duplicate. Let's call this platform 3 meters. And everything else we're going to keep the same, and we're going to hit accept. Oh, our normals are flipped. So because of the way that I scaled this, our normals are flipped the wrong way, which makes our box appear sort of flipped. So what I actually need to do, I actually unfortunately need to redo this. So this happened, I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to show you on this why this happened. So this happened because when I went to scale this down to the height of 4 meters, I tried to scale it down instead of up. And you can kind of see when it reaches that flip point, it made it so it has flipped normals. And I'm not going to get too much into normals for those of you that are unfamiliar with them, but just know that what you'll need to do is scale this up first. I mean, we will discuss normals later on when we talk about like creating art assets, but at this stage, it's not super important. Just know that you need to scale it upwards, not downwards. We're going to delete our platform thing here because this is incorrect now. So let's delete it. So now we have our 3 by 3 by 4. It's floating in the air, but we're going to fix that in just a second. So let's duplicate duplicate the mesh using the mesh duplicate feature here. Let's set our name to platform 3 meters, delete inputs, accept. Okay, so you may be looking at this and being like, whoa, it's still showing a 4 by 4, and that is because we still need to bake our scale here. So just like we did before, we're gonna come in to, where'd it go? Bake RS. I'm gonna uncheck rotation. I don't believe that having it checked would affect this because I haven't actually rotated it at all, but I'm just gonna uncheck it because I wanna keep everything pretty consistent. We're gonna hit accept, and now when we look at our platform, it appears correctly in our master static mesh here. I'm just gonna hit F2 and delete the random string. Again, you can disable that, you can disable the adding of the random string. And I discussed how to do that in previous videos, but I like to keep it there as a failsafe. So I actually want the pivot of these not to be at the bottom because I want to determine the placement based on where the top of the platform is, because that's the part we actually care about. So let's hit pivot to go into pivot editing mode. And we have our snapping turned on still, so we can just drag this up. Oops. It looks like our snapping got a little messed up. No worries, we're just gonna hit top to snap it to this face here. And then we're gonna drag it over to and over to. So now it's at this top corner and we're gonna hit accept. So now we can push this 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, that was 5. This would be 4 down. And then just to make sure it's lined up, we can do this to make sure. And we can hit Control and End if it's off by a little bit, and that will snap it to the nearest grid point based on whatever your size is, right? So if I had this off the grid, right, and I snapped it to the 100, it would snap to 100, but if I had it off the grid and I snapped it to a 10, it would snap to the nearest 10, so you can see it moves a little bit less. I think I covered that in a previous video, but just a reminder. So let's snap it to the nearest 100 and move it back to approximately where it was. I think we said we had this one 3 meters out, but it felt a little too close. So let's put it 4 meters out. And now I'm gonna hold Alt and select this right angle between these two to duplicate it along the X and the Y axis, but keep it on the same Z height. So we're gonna move this one out here like this and delete that. And I'm gonna move this one out to approximately where it was. Okay, so before we, that looks a little bit better. Before we move on, let's just double check here because I placed things back approximately where they were, but not exactly. So let's just test this to make sure that we can actually get across relatively easily, and we can. Okay, so let's refer back to this to reorient ourselves. So we have 1, 2 units this way before we hit this gate. So we already have the first one built out. Let's just extend the second one. And let's also make sure that everything here is in the correct folder to save ourselves some headache later on. Cool. 2, 1, 2. And I believe, yes, so we just come in 1 and then we have our hallway here. And 2. Okay, so now we just need to do the same thing with the ceilings and duplicate all of those over. So let's move this one out. And let's check on this first one to see how it's lined up. It looks right. Let's put this one into ceiling 4. And now we're just going to duplicate all these out. Looks like we're maintaining good snapping here. Everything looks aligned. There we go. So last thing we need to do for this room, of course, is to add some work lights so we can see what we're doing. So I'm just dragging out these lights. And of course, these lights all have like settings so you can set the color and how strong they are and things like that. But these are just temporary work lights so I can see what I'm doing when I test the level. So I'm not worried too much about changing settings and getting the mood right just yet. Okay, that's fine. All right. This recording is getting sort of long, but I do just want to quickly finish up this last little room here before we wrap up the video. This one's super simple. It's just a square room. It's not going to have anything in it at this point. No traps, no funny platforms, nothing like that. So let's just build this room. It looks like it's 3 by 3. pretty easy stuff. So let's go 1. Let's make our room 5 folder. Let's put our point lights from 4 into the folder. Let's make a new folder for room 5. And we'll make a subfolder for the ceiling since we know we're going to need it. Let's move this piece into room 5. Okay. 3 by 3 for this room. Really basic. Oops. And 3. 1. Move to room 5. Oops. There we go. There we go. And last we got the ceiling pieces. Looks like they're snapping correctly. Looks like the floor is all snapped and the grids are lined up properly. And last thing we need to do is add a light into this room. I'm just going to put it sort of floating in the center for the time being. I'm going to hit save all right here, and this is just going to save your level, as we can see right here, as well as anything in your content browser that is not already saved. Probably should have discussed this before, but if you see this little asterisk down at the bottom of your assets, that just means that they have not yet been saved. So if Unreal crashed or something, they wouldn't be there. So just make sure you're saving early and often. You can also just save your level. Like, let's say you haven't added any new content here, but you have dragged out new pieces into your scene. Well, you could just save this configuration of your scene by coming up here and clicking the saves the level to current disk here. But I don't need that there. So, okay, so we have our last end goal room here. So the last thing I want to do before we wrap up this video is just to test out the level start to finish. So I'm just going to hit play up at the top here, and we're going to play from our player start. This is our scale reference. He's just still there. So we're going to run through. We hit our first jump. Good. Easy to clear. We're going to hit our catwalk. It's easy to run across without, falling. Same here. This is our last room. And this is probably the most difficult room to traverse, but it probably should be because we are ramping up the difficulty as we go room to room. And then we clear it and we end in our last level. So we've tested our level. It is possible to clear all of this right now. So this is our first pass for our prototype, but as you are playtesting it, you are probably noticing that this level is pretty boring. So we are actually going to do a second pass on the prototyping to add a little bit of interest and a little bit of variation to this level. So that will be when we come back, and I will see you in the next video.